Let's talk about how we're all in this together in an economic sense with Treasurer Josh Frydenburg delivering that economic statement to the nation tomorrow. Let's preview it with Deloitte Access Economics' Chris Richardson. Thanks for joining us again, Chris. This is going to be an extraordinary statement tomorrow. What budget deficits? I'm a little confused here. Help me out. The deficit for the financial year just finished will be nearly $200 billion. And the year we're in might be about $100 billion. Are those the sort of numbers we're talking about?
Perhaps the other way around.
Other way around, right.
That the one we just finished, $100 billion, the one we're commencing could be as high as $200 billion. They are absolutely boggling numbers. Having said that, consider the alternative. What we're doing is leaving money in the pockets of families, in the pockets of business at the time they need it most. Nobody wants to see deficits of this size, but they're there for a reason. And Australia, in fact, even just ignore the health side of it. We were lucky, or more than lucky, it was a lot of blood, sweat and tears to reach a balanced budget and to have low debt as a government compared to a number of other nations around this world when this hit. That's allowed us to go on the front foot on a bunch of things. They cost money, but they cost money for good reason.
Yeah, a lot of us have argued for a long while we needed to get our budget into balance, reduce our debt, perhaps get some money in the bank ready for external threats. Well, the external threat came. We never really got to get rid of our debt. But as you say, the budget did at least get back to a balanced position. When you talk about the sorts of numbers that we're going to be dealing with tomorrow, who better to describe them, if not detail them, than Josh Frydenburg? Here he was on Melbourne radio this morning.
The figure being thrown around is a suspected $200 billion deficit over time.
Well, Neil, they're nothing to celebrate. They're eye-watering numbers, and they reflect the dire economic environment created around the world by the coronavirus. This is, without doubt, the biggest economic shock this country has ever faced, and we're not out of the woods yet.
Eye-watering deficits and debt, Chris Richardson. It's not often you get treasurers being that frank.
Yeah, and look, we need to be frank. Part of this does involve honesty with the Australian public. You'd prefer we didn't have a pandemic. You'd prefer we didn't need to throw money at it with JobKeeper and JobSeeker. You'd prefer it didn't hit the economy, meaning that the tax take will head down as well. You'd prefer that we didn't have renewed outbreaks in Victoria. Had the government delivered this update a couple of weeks ago, it would have been a happier story on both the economy and the budget. But it is what it is. We are using the budget as intended, as a defence when we need it most.
Chris Richardson, I think no one could disagree with what you say and therefore with what Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenburg have put forward, and in fact the Labor opposition has supported. If indeed we get through this pandemic crisis over the next 6 to 12 months and start to emerge out of it, but what if we're forced to live like this with this COVID-19 outbreak resurging now and again and creating chaos around the world for years to come? How long can we sustain this level of expenditure and these increasing levels of debt?
Yeah, and that is an entirely reasonable point. If the crisis keeps changing, hanging around longer than expected, then we are going to have to change what we're doing around it. Mind you, and even with what is happening in Victoria, Australia remains one of the global success stories. The economic figures that the Treasurer will announce tomorrow, I would say, would probably show that the economy went backwards a little bit in the financial year we just finished, and will go backwards a little bit more, 1.25% in the financial year we're in. Now, you don't want to go backwards, but those numbers are very good compared to what we're seeing around the rest of the world. Not to say that any of this has been perfect. If we could do it all again, there are things we would have done differently, but I'm kind of reminded of the Miracle on the Hudson where the, Captain Sully Sullenberger had all of 208 seconds to land the plane. So far, we've been steering for safety relatively well. If your point, if it keeps changing in more dangerous ways, we're going to have to start to do different things.
We sure are. Which brings me to that medium to long-term outlook and the discussion that's been around of late about modern monetary theory. Some people arguing effectively that governments around the world can just keep printing money and we'll all be okay. Did the Reserve Bank governor put a stake through the heart of that theory in his speech this week?
He did. You know, it's the old, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is true. Or my personal thought is, you know, if there's a clock on the wall and it's stopped, even so, twice a day, it will be right. Right now, in the circumstances in which unemployment is high and interest rates are effectively as low as they can go, some of the things that modern monetary theory are talking about make sense. If any other situation, I wouldn't be saying that those, or some of them, make sense. Right now, though, yeah, you do want governments out there and protecting the economy. Every taxpayer dollar is precious, but right now every taxpayer dollar is probably more effective than it's been in Australia in many decades.
And just before we let you go, Chris, you've been to God knows how many budgets and lockups and economic statements in the past. I've seen you at so many lockups myself. But on the eve of this statement tomorrow, it's going to stand out as a very historic moment in the nation's fiscal history, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, and it is big bucks. I am a tragic around budgets, right? It's a national social compact. We tax businesses, we tax workers, we spend it on the young and the old and the sick and the poor and the defence force, right? And so we should. And getting that right is incredibly important. But right now we have more sick people and more poor people. And that, you know, changes the balance. It means we have to go into emergency mode, especially if the Reserve Bank can't help already any more than it's already doing.
Thanks for joining us again, Chris. Look forward to seeing your commentary tomorrow.
Thanks, Chris.